A very good afternoon to everyone. This is Shamli from Junior C. Today in this corporate session, we have with us a remarkable person who will provide us in-depth information regarding leadership, public and private domain. And also, here students will come to know how these are having their impact on corporate sector. A member of 1976 batch of the Indian Administrative Service, Mr. K. Raj retired as an additional Chief Secretary of the Karnataka government. It is my honor to welcome you, sir. Mr. Jairaj has held key appointments in the infrastructure, energy, transport, and urban development sector, including Principal Secretary and ACS. He has been in the Managing Director for Bangalore International Airport Limited, Karnataka Power Corporation Limited, and Karnataka State Road Corporation. He has been Commissioner of Bangalore City Corporation for 2 terms, and also he has been the Commissioner for Commercial Taxes and Principal Secretary to the Chief Minister of Karnataka. With Mr. N. Narayanamurthy as chairman, Mr. K. Jairaj has helped establish the Bangalore International Airport Limited, that was India's first greenfield airport on public-private partnership basis. Mr. Jairaj has served with the World Bank Washington DC, USA as senior public sector management specialist. Mr. Jairaj's academic background is in economics, public policy management and law. He has a BA honors degree in economics from University. He is MA in Economics from Delhi School of Economics. He has completed his MPA, that is Master of Public Administration, from Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs, Princeton University, USA, and MPA from Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University, USA. He has an LLB degree from Bangalore University too. He is an independent director on the boards of listed companies, was advisor at Ernst and Young and the Manipal Group. He has mentored startups in digital marketing, hospitality, retailing, and precision engineering. He is associated with not-for-profit organizations in Bangalore. He is the president in AMC, that is Association for the Mentally Challenged. He is working president at Sri Krishna Sevashram Hospital. He is a chairman, board of trustees at Bangalore Jnana Samaj. He is president of Center. Sir, we all are very excited to get your views and your insights on leadership, public and private domain. Now, looking forward to this interesting session, we, the MBA students of Christ University, welcome you, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Shamli, for that very elaborate and rousing introduction. Greetings to all my young friends from the Christ University School of Management. I'd also like to first acknowledge the great role that Christ University is playing in the higher education of our country. And it is not for nothing that Christ University has got such a great recognition and ranking as being among the country's best. And all credit is due to the various faculty, the administrators, and the staff who comprise the Christ University. I'd also like to thank the School of Management, especially Professor Srikanth, for having invited me today, and would like to acknowledge the students and faculty who are present at this corporate interface. Let me tell you what is the scope of this presentation of mine and how I intend to go about it. I want to make this a kind of purposeful interaction where I can advance my views on a very important subject which concerns all management individuals, no matter where they stand, that is leadership. And I want to do this on the basis of my own personal experiences being involved in various organizations, especially in the public space. In a couple of case studies that I'll bring out, I would like to speak about what the leadership challenges were, how we attempted to face them, and more importantly, what are the takeaways for a young audience like you. My context is the public domain because, as Shamli said, I have worked several years in the government, in the public domain. I have been part of large organizations, and therefore, I would like to give a first-person account of some of the leadership issues that I have faced. This is in the form of 3 case studies that I will speak about. I would also like to draw on some matters of experience from the private sector, except that I find that maybe that can be the subject of another interface because I have more than enough to kind of discuss with you in the public domain. At the end of it all, what I want you to do is I want you to think about what I am saying. I want you to raise issues and questions. And very important, so that this is a good learning experience for you, have a couple of takeaways that you can dwell on, think about, and try to implement in your lives. Just a few words about myself to add to what Shamli has said so that you get an idea of what kind of cases I'm trying to bring about. As she said, my experiences in the government are in infrastructure, finance, energy, transport, and urban development. And in each of the assignments that I have been part of, I have tried to think of myself as a change agent, somebody who's focused on improvement, somebody who wants to deliver at a higher level than what may have been before. And that really I'd like to bring out in the case of these work studies, case studies. After my stint in the government, I have been involved in higher education. I have been involved in the management of large listed companies. And what I have seen is what is the private sector corporate interface of this leadership? How do both of them mirror out when it comes to issues of leadership? But I'll speak more of that as we go along. My first case study, my young friends, is about the introduction of market segmentation and branding in a public sector company. This was the Karnataka State Road Transport Corporation. You're familiar with KSRTC, BMTC, and so on. So many years ago, I was vice chairman and managing director of KSRTC. And when I went there, I observed that, this organization was in a stagnant position. And it had great threat from the private operators. It was not able to manage the private operators or match them in terms of quality of service, durability, reliability, and so on. And as a result, its market share was on the decline, especially in long distance routes. But as against it, I also found that KSRTC had a very good technical base. It had very well trained manpower that had to be motivated and put to use. So, in this context, once I had studied the entire organization, I put in some interventions in place. At that point in time, when I entered KSRTC, Volvo, the luxury bus manufacturer, had brought out the first brand of buses that you see on the road now in large number, but then it had not yet started. And each of those buses were 55 lakhs of rupees compared to the 12 lakhs which KSRTC paid for the ordinary red bus that was on the road. So I seized that as an opportunity. I thought to myself, if we can bring about these buses on our roads, it would provide a higher level of service and opportunity to our public. But that was met with stout resistance from within the organization because they said, sir, you are new here. Our regular red buses cost 12 lakhs of rupees. These luxury buses are 5 times that price. They cost more. Their maintenance is an issue. And definitely, if you buy these buses, it will lead to a loss. But anyway, and I won't go into those issues, we took a decision to buy 20 of the Volvo buses. But I realized that only introducing them will not do the trick. We had to also create a better image. We had to create a brand. We had to convince the public that the service being offered was much better than what the red buses were. So after a lot of brainstorming, we introduced these buses as a new type of KSRTC activity, and we called them Airavata. You might see those names on the luxury Volvo buses in and around KSRTC today. Airavata is Indira's vehicle. As against the red color, we gave it a different color altogether. We gave it a different form and shape, and we selected drivers, especially with those with a independent, proper service record without any accidents, trained them, made them wear proper uniform with ties, and after all this branding exercise was there, we set proper service standards. We told the public that the tickets on these buses will be higher than other categories. These buses will run only long distance, Bangalore, Bombay, Bangalore, Pune, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Bangalore, Madras. But there is a service guarantee attached. If the buses start half an hour late, we will pay back the entire ticket. We couldn't give a guarantee as to whether the buses would reach on time because that depends upon road conditions and so on. But we could certainly take the responsibility of starting the buses on time. So that was the service guarantee. And more importantly, we introduced a kind of pride of service in the drivers and the conductors by saying, look, this is the new type of KSRTC vehicle. This is what is going to give us a foothold in the market. And so let us make the best use of it. After all this motivation and training and selection, we put these buses into play. And I'm happy to tell you, my dear friends, that this pride in work on the part of our employees, this service guarantee, this branding worked wonders. What it did was it brought about a lot of public acceptance for these KSRTC buses. It brought us a lot of traffic. It beat back the private sector competition, and these buses made a terrific impact on the bottom line, that is the revenues of KSRTC. So I told you that we started with 20 buses. Now, in the KSRTC fleet itself, there are more than 2,500 Volvo buses. When it cost us 50 lakhs earlier, today I'm told these buses are nearly 1 crore of rupees, but still they are the best in terms of luxury standards in India. So this is the example of the Airavata buses introduced in KSRTC, where for the first time in the country, a public sector transport corporation introduced market segmentation. You are familiar with the soaps that are available. There are different kinds of soap, and these soaps are luxury soaps. They have different banding, color, packaging, and so on. You have never heard about segmentation of the market when it comes to transport companies. But this is a good example of that segmentation. And what I learned from this KSRTC example is first, that leadership can make the difference. And not just myself as the chief executive and managing director, but the technical staff, the organizational staff, the drivers, all of them put together created that new movement in KSRTC that took it to a higher level. Secondly, and this is of great importance to all my young friends here, that in order for anything to succeed, there must be quality team effort. One managing director, one person cannot bring about a change. Change must come when everybody contributes to their might in the context of a team. And that kind of collaborative effort is at the heart of good performance. And that is what a leader should do to tap this kind of collaborative effort. And the third thing is that in any organization, at any level, innovativeness works. We thought about bringing about a new kind of bus. We thought of branding. We thought of service standards. We thought of service guarantee. And we thought of training these drivers so that there can be an error free training record. All this led to this great example of Airavata in KSRTC. Now, I'm very happy to tell you that after we did this branding and so on, other state companies like Andhra and Maharashtra, they kind of followed us because imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. So that, in brief, is what the KSRTC example and my first case study is. I can stop here and we can reflect on it. And if you have any questions, we can have it. Or I can finish my cases and then we can pose it for a discussion with you. So I guess I will do the second. Namely, I'll go on to the second case study. And then, after the third, we can have a full-length discussion on these subjects. My second case study has to do with project management. And the background for that is the implementation of the 1,500 crore thermal project in Raichur. I was managing director of the Karnataka Power Corporation, which is the main electricity generator in the state of Karnataka, having both hydel and thermal capacity. And when I went to KPCL many years ago, Karnataka was in the midst of a severe power crisis because the demand for power was much more than the supply of power. Private sector had not yet made its entry into power generation, and all the emphasis was on the public sector to generate more power. So, again, to cut a long story short, Karnataka Power Corporation was entrusted with the task of expanding the capacity in the Raichur thermal power station by 420 megawatts, for which we had to raise the resources altogether. So we put together a financial package of 1,520 crores. And for the first time in the history of the state power situation, we were able to get 15 financial institutions to fund this major project led by ICICI and IFCI, Canara Bank and others. So they agreed to fund us to the extent of 1,520 crores for the expansion. But they had one question. They said, the public sector has a very poor record of implementing projects on time. There are a lot of cost overruns, time overruns. How do we know that you, as MD KPCL, will implement this project? What are you going to do that is different? Because the average time taken for a power project in Karnataka was 10 years, as against the slated period of 4 to 5 years. Cost overruns were also chronic. So they had a genuine apprehension that we will not be able to complete projects on time. So what I did was I took heed of their suspicion and we made a number of interventions which I am going to place before you quickly. First, we created a project team with a project manager to emphasize the responsibility for quick implementation lay on this project team and project manager, what you call in management as pointed responsibilities. Second, we did what is called failure analysis. We looked at earlier projects and asked the question, why were these projects delayed? What are the factors leading to delay? What you call failure analysis, the gaps and the criticalities. And we identified one by one, and we told the project team, make sure that each of these gaps and criticalities is properly addressed in the context of this RTPS expansion project. One criticality, for instance, is that there would always be delay in issuing drawings for the project. It's a huge mechanical electrical project, this power station. drawings are important and drawings would always come after the due date. That we eliminated by fixing a schedule of drawings and making sure that the drawings would always come on time. Thirdly, very important in the context of the public space, we devised and implemented a transparent public procurement system. Procurement means purchasing or fixing the approval for various activities. In a large power station, there were 65 packages or so of electrical, mechanical, and civil works. So for each of these packages, we devised a proper plan, an RFQ, a request for qualification, a request for proposal, acceptance of tender, evaluation of the bid, choosing the most competitive tender, award of bid, giving the letter of intent, creating a proper workflow, ensuring that the work could start on time, monitoring it, and making sure that all the flaws were worked out. So this transparent public procurement system had a definite schedule of works which we mounted on a system called Primavera. You might see in the context of project management, a good software system. And by that, we created a proper public procurement and implementation system. But that was not enough, because I told you that in a large power project, there are more than 65 agencies involved. Now we created a sense of partnership among these agencies. We told them, you are not just a contractor for this project, you are a partner. This is something that we are doing for the state and for the country and for the people. So you are as much responsible for its effective implementation as we are. And to recognize your responsibility, we will pay you on time. We will not make any wrong deductions. And we will make sure that the atmosphere in which you work is a trouble-free, clear atmosphere. And having done that, we also did something that was very significant. Perhaps for the first time in the Indian public sector, we introduced incentives for early completion. We had milestones for work, that if you complete this phase, that's milestone 1, milestone 2, milestone 3, and so on. And if you complete the project within a particular period ahead of schedule, that counted as early completion. And because of this early completion, we will give you an incentive. For instance, the major chunk of the project is called boiler, turbine, and generator. That constitutes about 70% of the project, 65%. BHEL was the BTG supplier. And we told BHEL, project cost, his cost was about 800 crores. We said, if you complete this ahead of schedule, we will give you 100 crores or 85 crores as incentive money. So this fueled a sense of great participation in the agencies, and they really took up the work on time. And they completed. Many of them qualified for this incentive of early completion, and they got bonus cash payments because of the early completion of the project. In addition, we also had a problem-solving approach. I want to talk about that a little more in detail later. But this problem-solving attitude was one that tried to share the problem and sort it out through monthly visits, weekly visits, through making an effort on the part of the technical team and project team to address all the problems that the association, that the workers, or that the agencies had at the site level. And I followed it up by at least weekly or fortnightly visits from Bangalore to Raichur, which is an overnight journey by train, and by going on the project site, talking to the agencies, talking to our engineers, and making sure that all the hold points were addressed. In management parlance, it's called management by walking about. And that's exactly what we did by being proactive and making sure that we address the problem at the root. My young friends, at the back of it, what we tried to do was to align everything in the organization to the quick completion of the target. To my mind, this alignment of the organization with the quick completion of the target is what is called the heart of project management. And that's exactly what we did. But there's something else we did that's very important because we are talking of the public sector. And the main difference between the public sector and the private sector is in the nature of ownership. The public sector is owned by the people of the Karnataka state, whereas the private ownership is whoever is the shareholder, whoever has the shares, or whoever has the majority of the capital, they are the owners, hence called private. But here, what we tried to do was to create a sense of ownership among everybody, the workmen, the agencies, the government, the board of directors, the public representatives of Raichur district and of Karnataka state. And so this sense of ownership was what was critical in ensuring that there were no snags in this project. So as a result of all these interventions, what happened was that Raichur Thermal Power Station Expansion Project 5 and 6 was implemented 6 months ahead of schedule for the first unit and about 7 months ahead of schedule for the second unit. For the first time in the public sector implementation of projects in India, not just Karnataka, this kind of early implementation was done. It earned the recognition from the government of India, and more important, it set benchmarks for public sector project implementation in India. It's by early implementation, it saved 200 crores of rupees in direct project cost and also crores of rupees by way of interest saved because of early completion, lesser interest during construction component. That was the beneficial impact of the project management at Raichur. Now, what are the takeaways from this project? What did I learn? And what did my team learn from this project? I always say that apart from everything else, we learned the power of communication. There was constant communication between the head office and the site, between the engineers at site and the agencies, among the agencies, with the stakeholders, and with the government. This communication was clear and uninterrupted. It emphasized, therefore, that this project was of prime importance to everybody. That is communication. Second, I call it cash. Because we had that 1,540 crore financial provision, this project was well funded. One of the reasons we found because of delay in projects in the failure analysis was that the contractors or agencies would not be paid on time. And therefore, they begin to drag their feet. And once they drag their feet, delays would accrue. By paying them regularly, without any cut, depending on the work they had done, by making payment smooth and error-free, the component assured was quick completion. And therefore, cash was an important part of the project, the availability of financial resources. Third, commitment. How did we ensure commitment? For the agencies, we ensured their commitment by telling them that they are also stakeholders in this project and that if they do their work earlier, they would get this incentive, which I mentioned to you earlier. For the staff and for the engineers, we said, your commitment in this project will make it a bonus for the Karnataka people when they see that this project comes ahead of schedule and a state starved for power would get power earlier than what was anticipated. So that commitment kept the project on full gear. Finally, there was clarity. There was no ambiguity at all, either in the selection of the agency or in the project bidding or in the procurement or in payment or in completion, everything was streamlined and what we call in management as standard operating procedures, SOPs, was in full flow for the entire duration of the project. And finally, this is what I'd like to emphasize to all my young friends, is no matter what you do, there must be the sense of conviction that you can do it. So if we had been run of the mill and said, okay, yeah, in Karnataka, all these projects take time. So this project will also take time. Okay, instead of 5 years, let it take 10 years. We will inch along. If we had that kind of poor conviction, then this project would have also become a casualty. On the other hand, our putting together a project management team, our making sure that good agencies were selected, our emphasis on transparency, our, our requirement to recognize the agencies as stakeholders and to respect them, all that conviction made the project a success. And therefore, I emphasize that, winners can be anywhere. Anybody can be a winner as long as that person has conviction, as long as that person has communication, and as long as that person has clarity about purpose. So that is about the leadership challenge that we face in Karnataka Power Corporation and the implementation of the Raichur Thermal Power Station 5 and 6. By the way, I was not the only one doing it. There was a host of people. There were our great engineers. There were our technical people. There was the project manager. There were the site staff. I can't go into each one names, but let me assure you again, as I told you in the first case study, it was a team effort that led to the kind of great success that we saw in Raichur. Okay, my young friends, I now come to the third case study, and I think I have spoken for roughly about 28 minutes so far, so I have still a couple of minutes more, and then I will wrap it up. And this is something close to you. Those of you who live in Bangalore and who have a house, whose parents have a house, you probably know that they pay something called property tax. If you own a house, you're supposed to pay property tax to the BMP. And what they normally do is every year, their property tax amounts to a certain amount of rupees, and they issue a check and send it to the BMP under what is called the Self-Assessment Scheme of Property Taxes, SAS, where the house owner himself sends a check after knowing what the amount is. There is no intermediary in the process. But my young friend, this is not how it was. Before we started the self-assessment scheme, I was commissioner of Bangalore. When I first entered BMP, it was not BBMP, but BMP, I was horrified to see that this property tax, which is the most important tax of a city municipality, was so badly collected. Majority of the properties did not pay tax. Those who paid tax complained of the severe burden of tax. The method in which the tax was calculated was highly iniquitous, full of corruption. It also only depended upon the discretion of the rate inspector, what is called the revenue inspector, who was making the assessment of what the tax should be. So typically he would arrive at a house and say, this is a very nice house. It's got excellent flooring. Okay, so I'm going to assess it at about 1 lakh and you will have to pay a tax of 75,000 a year. And you as the owner would not know what basis it's calculated. So you would catch him and say, Salpa kadme madi, please reduce it. And so that guy would say, okay, you pay 35,000. You would be happy because you think you brought it down from 75,000 to 35,000. And you would say, okay, I'll pay it. But actually, in order to have it reduced, you would have had to give him some money. In fact, Samuel Paul, who ran the Public Affairs Institute, did a report card of all the civic services of Bangalore. At the time, I became commissioner. And this report card, which sampled people's opinion, said among all the public services in Bangalore that people complained of the most was this property tax. It was the most corrupt and most inoptimally created system. And so, working on that, one of the first things I did as commissioner was to focus on this issue. And I said, okay, this property tax has created so much of problem. It's also highly stagnant. It is not increasing in its revenue collection. So I set up a small team under the leadership of my number two, Mr. Ashok Dalwai, and consisting of another capable officer, Mr. Vasant Rao, whom I had brought from commercial taxes. I said, please work on this property tax system. Please let me know if any innovations have been done elsewhere in any part of the country and what we can do in order to change the system. So that was a kind of a team that was set up to examine and to work out an alternative. And once they did it, I won't go into all those details because it's not germane to this discussion. We proved the system. We saw what were the main points of this new system they had proposed. How was it different from the old system? What would be the acceptance? What would be the issues in its implementation? How would our staff react to it? What are called implementation issues. We worked out an implementation plan, and having worked out the implementation plan, we tried to get stakeholder support for it. We told the corporators, we told the government that we're going to change the method of property tax assessment, and we sought their opinion. What we did in this new system was the following. We divided Bangalore into a number of zones, like, Indranagar, Kempegowda Road, Jayanagar, Shantinagar, and so on. And within each of these zones, we looked at different types of construction. What are pakka construction, semi-pakka, and so on and so forth. And for each category of construction, we fixed the rate per square foot. So if you lived in Shantinagar, or if you lived on Banarghatta Road, and if you had a 2,000 square feet house, then the rate that we fixed per square foot was 20 rupees, let's say. That means it would be 40,000 rupees. And you had to pay, if you lived in your own house, 25% of that amount of 40,000 rupees, which is 10,000 rupees, as property tax. If you had rented it out, you had to pay 1/3 of it as property tax. So I'm just giving you an example. We printed this booklet, which contained all these mathematical examples, and we advertised it widely. And what we also did was to tell the public through a spate of meetings conducted by the Resident Welfare Association, conducted in various clubs and other places and chambers of commerce, about this new system in place. This, my friend, is what is called communication, about which I have spoken earlier also in Raichur. So we did effective communication about this property tax system. And in addition, we also got the support of the civic bodies, civic people, through the Bangalore Agenda Task Force led by Sri Nandan Nilekani. In fact, we got celebrity endorsements of this new system through cricketers like Roger Binney, Kirmani, through various other athletes who said, please opt for this property tax system, because by that you will be taken away all these problems that you face, the issues of corruption will not exist, because the main feature of this system was its clarity. Plus, you as the owner could calculate the tax and work out how much you had to pay and send a check to the commissioner. No more would the inspector come to your house and harass you. You calculated the tax and you sent it to the commissioner. Hence called self-assessment scheme. By this move, we empowered the citizens to feel responsible for their property and to pay the taxes to the BMP. Please understand this point very carefully. We transferred the responsibility from some nameless inspector to the citizen. And we thought rightly that once the citizen was given this responsibility, most of the citizens would prove to be responsible, they would prove to be cooperative, they would they would calculate their tax and pay the money. And we were proved right because in the first year itself, my dear friends, the extent of property tax collected doubled compared to the previous year. And we did two other things. We made it an optional system. So if you didn't want to pay according to the new system, you could continue to be assessed by the inspector and harassed by him. Because of certain legal tangles and so on, we couldn't make it compulsory for all. Later, it became compulsory, it became a law, and today everybody in Karnataka has to pay according to the self-assessment scheme. But at that point in time, we made it optional. And the other thing we did was to say that we trust you, but we will do a 10% check of your returns. If by chance we find that you have paid less than what you should pay, we will fine you 5 times what is the actual amount to be collected, something like that. And so that was a deterrent to try and promote good behavior among all the citizens. So having done that, having got this communication strategy in place of advertising it on the billboards, in the public places, on buses, celebrity endorsement, BATF, and so on, we launched it. And to again cut a long story short, it was a great success. Now, my young friends, why did self-assessment scheme succeed when BMP is a notorious area for failure? One, it was simple. People could understand it. The rules were clear. Anybody could follow it. Second, it was transparent. There was no intermediary. There was no inspector. You didn't have to go and catch somebody and get it done. You could do it yourself. Thirdly, it was proper. There was nothing special for some people and different for other people. It was just across the board. Fourthly, very important point, for the first time in the relation between the citizen and the BMP trusted the citizens. And this trust came in the form of self-assessment. And finally, and this is very important to me, it eliminated corruption. And people, are very incensed about corruption, especially when it hurts them, especially when they don't know what they are paying for. And the self-assessment scheme ensured that at least in the payment of property tax, there was no corruption. Okay, so let me assure you that things were not so simple. Okay, there were a lot of hiccups when we first announced the scheme. Okay, there was no positive reaction. The public were waiting. We didn't know whether it was going to succeed, and so many people who were detractors of mine in the corporation said this scheme is going to fail. This commissioner is not going to ensure that it will take place, and therefore we will see him off very soon. But because of all the communication, because of the support from stakeholders, it took off in a big way. But the main thing was that some of them who were hurt went to the court. They tried to get the court to intervene and say that this scheme should not succeed. But because we had made it voluntary, the court said the citizens have an option. Either they want to accept it or not. If they don't want to accept it, they can opt out of it. So therefore, we were able to make sure that the scheme succeeded. And finally, citizens gave very positive feedback. Even today, my friends, after many years, of being out of the corporation, even today, when I go here or there, somebody stops me and saying, "Hey, aren't you the person who started self-assessment scheme?" So that's the kind of feedback I get. But again, I want to assure you, I was not the only person who did it. There was Mr. Dalwai, there was Vasant Rao, there were so many countless people who worked in the BMP, who worked for the scheme, who succeeded. There was the BATF. There were all the others. There was the mayor of the corporation. There was our honorable chief minister, Mr. Krishna. All because of their unstinted support and cooperation, the self-assessment scheme succeeded. Now I ask myself the question, why did the self-assessment scheme succeed? Just as why did project management in Raichur succeed? Or why did this Airavata scheme of market segmentation succeed? And I have pinpointed a couple of reasons. One, there was a felt need for this change to take place. This old iniquitous property tax collection had to give way to something different. And that came in the form of the self-assessment scheme. Second, the scheme succeeded because it was easy to implement. It was easy to adopt. There was no complication. Ease of operation is very important in all activities. Thirdly, it ensured the removal of corruption. People could not bear the burden of corruption. And fourthly, it succeeded because of communication. Again, I emphasize the importance of communication in good management and good performance. Communication with a purpose, not just false communication, but communication when you had something important to tell the public. Okay, my dear friends, I have spoken about 3 cases: KSRTC, RTPS, that is Karnataka Power Corporation, and third about BMP. Let me now stitch them all together and talk to you a little bit. First, you might think, okay, leadership is important for the leader, the CEO, the commissioner. How does it affect me? I'm going to finish my MBA from Christ and I will join. I'll join as an entrant. How does it apply to me? And I tell you, leadership starts from the beginning. How? So many years ago, I met this man called Jack Welch. I don't know if you've heard of Jack Welch, but at one point in time, he was a legendary figure in management. He was the chairman of General Electric Company. And he had come to Bangalore to open the General Electric lab in Whitefield, which is a cutting edge kind of place for all modern research work, applied work that is done. And so I asked Jack Welch, and he later has mentioned it in his book called Straight from the Gut. I asked Jack Welch, Jack, you have recruited hundreds of people, leaders, young men, capable people. What do you see in people? And he said, I see 4 E's in people. 4 E's, my young friends. Think about it, each one of you. 1, you must be energetic. That is, you cannot be listless. You cannot be other than proactive. You cannot be dull. You have to be up and about. You must be energetic. Energy must ooze out of you. Second, it's not enough to be energetic alone. You have to work in a team. You have to collaborate. You have to work with others. And therefore, your presence must be an energizing presence. You must make everybody else feel equally competent, equally empowered, equally focused and aligned to the task. What I mentioned earlier was alignment to the task. Thirdly, empathy. We must have empathy for our work environment. We must feel for others. We must share whatever good is in them. And we must also feel that we are part of this together, creating the feeling that it belongs to all of us, the feeling of ownership, empathy. And fourth, on what Jack Welch emphasized, was that everybody should have a sense of ethics. I would like to strongly, I'm sure you do business ethics in your MBA program. No man is an island. You cannot function in a moral vacuum. You must have a set of do's and don'ts or a code of conduct. What is it that you will do and what is it that you will not do? How much will you go in any particular subject? That moral code of conduct or ethics is very important in all young managers. So remember the 4 E's that I mentioned: energy, energizing, empathy, and ethics. But to that, I'd also like to add a fifth E now in the context of the workplace of the 21st century. You must have execution excellence. You must be able to do a thing on time with the resources available and according to the quality which has been specified. This can do attitude is absolutely critical with proactive attitude, but getting things done is a very, very important quality for any young leader. So please remember these 5 E's. And to paraphrase what Jack Welch said, you must be a problem solver, you must be proactive, you must be a solution provider, and you must collaborate with people. So this is not only for leaders who sit on the top floor. This is for all people who work in an organization. This kind of a mental kit that they must have will make them leaders. Now, I want to make two more comments and then I'll conclude. One is, I want to say that no matter where you are, what you have to do, a method that you must adopt is first, study the organization wherever you are working. Second, look at what the mandate is, your work mandate, whatever it is, the mandate that you have. Third, what are the resources that are available? Everybody in their workplace has resources. And finally, who are the people you are working with? So if you can marry all the four, the organization, the authorizing environment, the mandate, and the people, you can execute for results. That is the leadership that is required today, whether you are in the public space or in the private space. And that is the method that, if I may say so, I try to employ in the context of those 3 examples which I have brought before you. Okay, my young friends, I was looking at a McKinsey study of the 21st century, and I thought it will be relevant to you while we wrap it up. This study says that between 2020 and 2030, this is for the United States, but still think about it as to how relevant it is for us. It says 2/3 of the jobs that are being done today in the US will not be relevant in 2030. 2/3 of the jobs will disappear because of artificial intelligence, machine learning, cognitive approaches by 2030. Secondly, it says that the workforce, whoever gets into the workforce in 2020 onwards, like you, will have to do continuous reskilling in order to be relevant in the workforce. So just doing your MBA now and passing out will not be adequate. How do you reskill yourself? How do you equip your mind and your skill set in order to be continuously relevant? Thirdly, you have to be adaptive to the environment. And that is not just in the United States, and that is also in India. And finally, this is something I picked up which may be relevant to us even in India, is that the nature of work itself is going to change. So when I joined the workforce many years ago, it was, employment for life. I'm sure your parents and others also, most of them must have had this 30, 35 years work stretch in one organization. Now, the nature of work is such that nobody remains in an organization for that period of time. People keep changing. Temporary employment is also the thing that we see, the so-called gig economy, where people can do more than 2 or 3 jobs simultaneously. And so, in this context of change, adaptation, how are you going to excel? To my mind, that is the real test of leadership. And I think you are very well placed, being in Christ, interacting with such competent faculty, thinking about things, organizing these corporate interfaces in order that you can get the skill set that you require to face the challenges of your job effectively. So I wish you all the best. I hope whatever I spoke for almost 50 minutes was of some relevance to you, and I'll be very happy to have your questions or to have your comments on this important issue of leadership, of which I have spoken in the public domain, but which also applies no matter where you are and what you do. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. So this was really insightful session. As you mentioned with the four E's, you were equally energetic and you were empathetic and sticking to your ethics and totally executing with the excellence. And this session was totally with the four P's. And as you added the fifth one, it was really nice and very insightful session, sir. So now I'll be putting forward some questions
Yes,
which are
please.
asked by various students.
Certainly.
So the first question says like, as these projects were really high risk involved projects, so how this public-private partnership came into the existence, like how you decide to come into this partnership, and how this partnership helps you in the risk management as well.
Yeah. Okay. So one good example of a public-private partnership was the Bangalore International Airport. Because of paucity of time, I didn't speak about it, but maybe some other occasion we can discuss it. So, there was a need for this new airport in Bangalore because the HAL airport was really inadequate. And the government didn't have the resources for the new airport and it wanted latest technology. So, what it did was it created a new special purpose vehicle with Mr. Narayan Murthy of Infosys, a great leader, as the chairman, and I became the managing director in addition to my work in KSRTC. And we created a public-private partnership by which, through a proper, transparent bid process, we got Siemens, West Germany, L&T, and Zurich Airport as the consortium partners to set up the Bangalore International Airport. And they had 74% of the equity of this project. And this project succeeded because the government ensured that the land was available, the government created a risk-free environment for them, and the government guaranteed them a certain amount of state support in order that viability issues in this project could be assured. So that was how the risk was shared between the government and the private sector. And in return, what the private sector did was it assumed the risk of construction, risk of operation, and risk of maintenance. In fact, my young friends, the Bangalore International Airport will be a fantastic study for you sometime in very good corporate interface as also public-private partnership. But that was a way in which risk was shared. And again, the reason why this project succeeded is because of the vision of the then Chief Minister, Mr. S.M. Krishna, the commitment of the government, not only of Mr. Krishna's government, but also the Dharam Singh government, and the fact that people cooperated in making this project a success. And we were able, through a transparent procurement procedure, to get the best in the world to start the Bangalore airport. No wonder that the Bangalore International Airport is today regarded as an outstanding boutique airport. It's not huge and large, but Neha, when we started the airport in 2008, we said by 2030, it will reach 30 million people. Well, by 2020, 10 years before, it has reached 30 million people, and an expansion and a second runway are now being taken up. So that speaks about the efficacy of this airport project.
Exactly, sir. This was actually a very inspiring story. And sir, as your KSRTC case, sir, so one question is like, how sure you were that Airavat will be successful, despite having such competition, say we have Volvo buses also. So how were you able to be so confident in this project?
No, it was a gamble, Neha. It wasn't, I didn't have any fairy godmother telling me this is going to succeed. It was a gamble that we took. But I knew that, KSRTC had a very solid base. I also knew that, we had very good technical manpower and that we could operate in a good way using our strengths. And finally, the people wanted change. That's important, People wanted a higher level of service. They were willing to pay for it. And if you could introduce it and make sure that it was error free, they would accept it. So, I followed up this KSRTC Airavata thing with having air-conditioned lounges in bus stands. And I said, why should only those who go to the airport have these good lounges? We can also have it in the bus stands. And, they paid more to get in. But so it was a question of willingness to pay in order to get a higher level of service. And these are common across public or private spaces. So that's what we did.
Yes, sir. Even the power of the paying capacity of the customer is increasing. So they generally demand a very high service because they
Correct.
are actually ready to pay.
Correct.
Yes, sir.
Correct.
So on the similar lines, like you said you took a gamble. This was like a gamble, and you took a risk. And like in today's time, how a leader or a manager can actually identify all these needs and like tap into all the future needs. Like how can we? Like,
So, I said, it's very important that all of you, once you finish your MBA and you get into the workplace, no matter where you get into, you must scan the environment. You must look at the organization that you're part of, wherever it is, and you must identify what does the organization do and what am I expected to do. And how am I expected to do it? What are my resources available? Who are my team players? And what are their strengths? And how do I relate all of it in order to get work done? That is not the task only of the leader and CEO. It is everybody's task. All of you. And once you are able to put it all together, set yourself objectives and achieve it, you will see that your level of performance also goes up. You will be a winner. And once you have that winning trait, you will be regarded as a high performer. And that high performance will get you ahead. You don't have to be unethical. You don't have to go behind people's back. You don't have to do anything that is wrong. Just doing your work effectively, understanding the nature of your work, harnessing all your abilities will make you a leader and a winner. Remember what Jack Welch said, as you said, energy, energizing, empathy, ethics, and execution excellence. Getting things done, that will take you ahead. That is
yes,
what
sir.
I would like to emphasize to each one of you who are present here today. Because, okay, formal learning is great. What you learn in your MBA program, finance, OD, HR, operations, management, that is only the mental equipment to think and execute. But you, who are you? Who are you? Are you just your MBA or are you more than that? That is what each one of us has to assess. And the can do attitude is critical for performance.
So, sir, as you're mentioning, this is actually the whole team which is required to make such project successful.
Correct.
So, being a leader and a manager, we generally find that it's not everyone is 100% involved. Like, what from a manager or a leader's point of view, we can put forward our steps and make everyone work equally, and like, should they give 100% like equally?
So, Neha, now it is, contribute or perish. Once upon a time, in any organization, you could have stragglers, guys who just pretended they were working but actually did not do any work. We had what is called the 80-20 rule. The 20% of the people did 80% of the work and 80% goofed off. Now that is no longer valid in any organization, especially the modern organization of the 21st century. Here, everybody's worth is assessed on the basis of their contribution. And you have an international workforce, you have different operating procedures. Your boss may be in San Francisco, I don't know where. And if they find that you don't perform, you don't adhere to deadlines, you're not committed to your work, you don't enforce quality, you cannot survive in your organization. On the other hand, for people who do all this, the path of growth is excellent. So, whether you are working in an organization, whether you are an entrepreneur, whether you do a startup, you have to want to do well continuously and you have to improve. what is called Kaizen, continuous improvement, what the Japanese call Kaizen. That should be each one of our creed. And that is why in an environment like Christ, which is such an extraordinary environment, each one of you, each one of your 750 or whatever number you have, each one of you can be a winner because you have the potential and capacity to succeed.
Yes, sir, and a very supportive faculty as well.
You have a great faculty and you can work to make it happen for yourself, for the community, and for the country. You're working at the end of the day for others. And the harder you work, the better you get in your job.
And this is coming from an IAS officer. So yes, sir. Um, and sir, as you told, like for the better performance of a project, you actually gave some incentive. So how did this affected the cost of your project, and how did you cover it?
You're right. That's a very good question. When we introduced these incentives, the auditors raised objection and said, you never thought of this in the project. It is adding to the project cost and so on. But that's a very short-sighted view because look what it did. It saved us 200 crores in direct cost. It saved us interest during construction. It provided millions of units of power for a starved state. You add all that up, the gains are so much more than the costs. And that is what we told the financial auditors and so on. But now what they have done is in most projects, they have built this early completion incentive into the project itself so that it becomes part of the project. That's what we see in modern projects across the board. But at that point in time, it was a real innovation to bring this early payment incentive.
Yes, sir. So there's another question. Like, how did your leadership style change? Like, there was a transition of you from public to a private. So, how did your leadership? What challenges you faced?
That's a very, very good question, and I compliment the person asking it because when I began, I was a theory X leader. You know what a theory X is? Command oriented. I am the boss. You follow what I say. Okay, that's the theory X army type of leadership hierarchy and so on. And over time, I realized that people will not be led. People have to be convinced to work. People have to feel that they also have something in it, what is called ownership. Just as in KSRTC, we emphasized ownership, we told the driver that the pride of accomplishment is as much yours. If the bus is clean and if it goes on time, error free, you are responsible just as much as the managing director is. That kind of ownership you have to build into teams. And that ownership will mean a new kind of leadership, which is what I call as adaptive leadership. Theory Y. Let us all work together. Let us all be part of this team. The win here is as much for you as it is for me. And so over a period of time, I personally moved from this theory X, command and control, I will do it and you follow me, approach to let's do it together. It is a win for all of us. And today in the private sector, I see from my experiences of being on the boards of companies that the chief executive has to be the most competent, well-learned person. He or she has to set the goals. He has to set the objectives, create a good mission for others, and motivate people to do work. And that motivation has to come through example, encouragement, incentive, a variety of ways, not just the big stick. If you don't work, I'll beat you. That won't do because people will not react to that positively. So there's a huge change, I think, in my own leadership style. But more than me, the requirements of the present organization are completely different from the requirements of 50 years ago.
Yes, sir. Even I think people are today more towards like being your own boss.
Right. You're right. Yeah.
Right.
I think somebody, Kavita Gowda? No. Okay. Sorry. Go ahead, Neha. You're on mute.
So, sir,
Neha. Yeah.
yeah. So, sir, there's another question. You have been, you have worked at various positions and various organizations also. So, do you have any preference towards one or the work you like the most? Do you have one to share?
Well, I'm very fortunate because I have really, really enjoyed every kind of work I have done, whether it is in the power sector or whether it is in transport or whether it is urban development. I was also managing director of a bank. I ran a company that marketed silk yarn for weavers who made saris. I enjoyed that work also. So all the work that I have done, I have enjoyed, and I think people who are my mentors also said that if you have a positive attitude, every work becomes that much important. It's not just certain works that are important, certain organizations that are critical. I mean, you take the work that a teacher does, or a nurse, or you take the work that any ordinary person does. It is of such vital relevance to our country today that if they give their best, the country progresses. And that should be the attitude that all of us have to our work. Give your best to your work, no matter what it is. Okay?
Definitely, sir. So, there's another question. What is the This is actually related to civil services exams, and
Ah.
student is asking about the what level of preparation is needed for cracking such exams.
Well, this is it's a difficult question because it's very competitive. And so in my days, the number of people who sat for the exam were 25,000. Today, it is 20 times that, 2.5 to 3 lakhs, maybe more. And so there are exams at various levels. There's this preparatory exam which you have to clear, and then a final exam, and then an interview. So it's a hard work. It is maybe work spread over 1 year, and you have to concentrate on your subjects. You have to get the best out of it. Again, there too, Neha, it is the kind of assimilation, preparation, and putting it all together that is important. And if you have a proper attitude, mental attitude, along with hard work, you can crack the civil service exam. Because genius is 99% perspiration and only 1% inspiration. So people can work hard. If they work hard, if they're reasonably intelligent, and if they're prepared to commit themselves to the job, they will definitely come out in flying colors.
Yes, each and every word is noted, and I really hope people preparing for it actually best wishes to them also. And so, any advice to this our young generation, how to balance our personal as well as work life, like
Yeah.
how to balance between both.
Yeah, I really, I'm very envious of the younger generation because it's so exciting to be young citizens of this great country and this great world. You have so many opportunities, and you have cognitive learning, artificial intelligence, machine learning, augmented reality. Everything is, I went to the United States last year, and I went to a big car factory, okay? Car factory, and that they make hundreds of thousands of cars there. And I was astonished to find, Neha, that a majority of the work was done by robots. And what the robots done, all the heavy lifting, sheet metaling, cutting, sizing, painting, erection, assembly was done by the robots. And all the people had to do the intellectual work, planning, scheduling, completion. I'm just talking about so there is not going to be any drudgery at work anymore. There's only going to be an intellectual element at work. And there's going to be rapid. I told you when I ended my speech, I said 2/3 of the jobs that are being done today in the US will not be relevant 10 years hence. And I said that, the nature of employment is also going to change. So to all of you, the key thing is how are you going to adapt to the future? What are you going to do in order to redevelop, reskill yourselves? But along with all that, okay, I want to emphasize two things on the basis of my own experience. One, you have a duty to society. Please don't think that your duty is only to yourself. You must be responsible citizens. Wherever you are, whichever country you live in, you must be responsible, law-abiding, committed and sincere citizens of whichever environment you live in. And secondly, you have a duty to your family. Whatever family you have, you must realize your family responsibilities. And there's something called a work-life balance that is very important. Whoever you are, whatever you do. And I realized this when I went to work in the World Bank in Washington, D.C. Some years ago, and I found that more than 50% of the staff are divorced. Why? Because all they did was to keep working all the time and they neglected their families, and gradually the families fell apart. So if you are going to have a family, if you're going to have children and all that, you must be able to watch out and look out for them. You must give your time to them. It is not a chore. It's not some diversion of time. It is equally important for you to understand those responsibilities. So those challenges are much more for your generation than they were for mine. But they are very important in order to ensure a fulfilled life. And finally, here's the important thing. In my opinion, okay, success is not one dimension. It's not just your professional work. It's not just the money you make. It is a combination of all of it. And so what values you have, and this is the time when you start developing those values, what values you have are very important in determining how accomplished and how fulfilling your life has been. So you have a fantastic life ahead. You guys can really make the best of your lives, contribute to society, contribute to your workplace, contribute to your families, and be great citizens of this country. I really feel that.
Thank you so much for this inspiring words. And so now I would actually like to invite Mr. Omkar for a word of thanks.
Thank you, Neha.
Thank you, sir.
My pleasure.
Good evening, sir. My words
Hi.
may not be capable in express our sense of gratitude to Mr. Valued Guest of Honor, to Mr. K. Jairaj sir, Honorable Dignitaries and most valued guests. It's my privilege to propose the vote of thanks on behalf of Christ University, especially thanking Mr. K. Jairaj sir, who has spared his precious time for us and graced this occasion and giving extreme insights about the leadership. Your deep insights and future forecasting about the industry of public and private domains has given some enlightened thinking and makes us aware of these industries. You had set a benchmark for ourselves and necessary die attitude helps us to excel in all endeavors. Behind every successful program lies the manifold attempts of our committed faculty for their painstaking trouble in identifying the most appropriate and distinguished personalities for inviting for this gracious corporate interface. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the immense contribution of our dedicated faculty. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir.